Hello again. Now, many South Africans are considering overseas studies for a chance to emigrate. That's according to BrandMapp's new survey. At least 75% of adults who've been surveyed have also shown interest in studying further. This survey states that while the demand for tertiary education in South Africa is growing, the costs remain an obstacle for many people. Well, let's unpack this survey now and discuss some of its findings and highlights with Brandon de Kock from BrandMapp. Brandon, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Is this a regular survey you do about education in South Africa, or is it part of a bigger survey, this issue around education?
Yeah, good afternoon, Dan. It is part of a bigger survey. So we do a piece of work every year called BrandMapp, where we try to understand and unpack what we call middle class and up South Africa. So that's kind of the people who pay the tax, let's put it that way. It's the group of maybe 12.5 million South Africans who live in households earning more than 10,000 Rand a month. And this is just a small part of what we do inside that big survey, just to try and understand where people's heads are at about education. You know, these are very educated people in South Africa, and it's just really interesting that about 12% of them say that they'd quite like to go and study overseas.
And that's what grabbed my that's what grabbed my attention when I saw that headline. But before we get to unpack that, just broadly, it looks like education remains one of the keys to the door of middle class and up South Africa. What are the numbers telling there? As you talk, we will show our viewers a full screen graphic of the slide presentation that BrandMapp has prepared.
So I guess in total, when we look at that middle class and up, and as I said, remember, we are talking about the taxpayers of South Africa. So although they're a relatively privileged group, you must also understand that we need these people in our country because they're kind of like pulling the whole economy along. And it looks like about 70% of these people have some sort of tertiary education. So it's kind of a natural assumption that you then make, or it's not a leap of logic. It's a natural conclusion that being educated, having a tertiary education, is kind of the key to the door of the middle class and up in this country. If you don't have an education, if you don't have a decent degree, it's going to be really hard for you to compete and to kind of break into that middle class and up. And that's kind of what we see. This is not a new result. We've seen this for the last 10 years.
And is the trend the same over the last 10 years? The levels have sort of remained the same, 70% of adults having some sort of tertiary education, or have we seen that 70% growing from a lower base?
It's not that we haven't seen, the footprint hasn't grown, but obviously the number of people has grown quite enormously. If you go back to 10 years ago, we've probably seen something like a 20% growth in the overall number of people who have some sort of education, which also, I guess, accounts for why so many more people with tertiary education are finding it more difficult to get jobs. You know, we have a lot of people with degrees that aren't really matched to the skills that are required in the country at the moment. A lot of humanities degrees, political science and sociology are fabulous, but that's not really, they're not in a country that needs engineers and doctors and teachers. So yes, we've always seen these high levels of education,
Yeah, okay, now let's come to the next one where you've mentioned it already. And that grabbed, when I saw that headline in another media talking about this, I thought, wow, interesting that you were having so many of these educated South Africans who are heading offshore. What are the numbers showing there, Brandon?
So the number that comes out is that almost everybody with an education wants to study more, whether it's part-time courses to do something or to further their degrees. But we put this little thing in, like, would you like to go overseas to study? And it's interesting that about 12% of people, which is quite a lot of people if you extrapolate the number, you know what I mean? It's going to be 1 million odd South Africans who say they're interested in studying overseas. And it doesn't mean they will or that they can. It's quite expensive to go and study overseas. You know, I saw a report this morning that a full year at an Ivy League college in America, like one of the top universities, it's going to cost you about between 1.2 and 1.5 million Rand. So it's not everybody who can afford to do this. But it's interesting that there's a reasonable pull overseas. I think it's because a lot of these people think that an overseas education might be a bit of key to living a life overseas or starting a life overseas.
Yeah, because it will afford them a chance to emigrate. But what I found there, I'm going to ask our technical team to bring back that graphic that we just showed now, that slide, is that 40% of this market are still studying through UNISA, which is very much online. So there's also people embracing the digital world, that you don't have to be sitting in a class, you can study online as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one thing that we definitely saw thanks to COVID. I think we've all become very used to this. Look at what we're doing right now. 10 years ago, I would have had to be in studio, and I think we've all got very used to this. And studying, it's very much democratized the studying, the space. I think that people are a lot more fond, or they have a greater appetite for doing things online. UNISA's always been a bit of a distance studying institution, but if you look at the others, the kind of online degrees from a formal institution, it's almost 30% of people showing a willingness to take their studying offline. I think there's a great hope there, because obviously the costs of that are quite a lot less than the costs of a physical formal education.
Yeah, you might find that 12%, about 1.2 million people, because of the prohibitive cost to go and study overseas, although it will rob them of a chance to emigrate, they might migrate more to the online studies as well, accessing some of those overseas institutions and save a bit of money. Okay, finally, one of the questions you put to these South African adults, these tax-paying middle, upper South Africans in terms of class, was how likely are you to study further? You also found a very interesting commitment there again in answering that question to education in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. We know, here's something we know for a fact, is that educated people understand the value of education, right? So if you haven't started on your continuum, on the journey sort of through life, and you're not terribly sure whether having an education is of any value, that's not where these people are at in their lives. They know that education is a key to getting work, or creating work, or creating your own business, and then as a way of getting better and better and earning more and more. Especially if you work for government, like 27% of our workforce is employed by the state or parastatal. And the moment you start getting masters and honors and letters after your name, it just increases your ability to generate income. So, yeah, I mean, there's the number, 73% of people of the middle class are saying that they're showing an appetite for wanting to study more. I think it's an incredibly positive sign. And it probably explains why you'll see, I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see education and the education business in this country just absolutely booming still. It has to. It's the only way we can grow things the way we need to.
Yeah, Brendan, I don't want to end this conversation without asking you further about a statement you made earlier in terms of the kind of degrees that people are getting and therefore not being able to get the appropriate jobs. I mean, broadly in your survey, we've just focused on 3 areas now, 3 questions about people wanting to go overseas and what's the percentage there, the interest South Africans are showing, the middle class to upper class South Africans are showing in going overseas, plus also the commitment to furthering their education as well online, but also going forward. From a skills gap, there's a commitment to education, but we do have a skills gap in the country. The BrandMapp survey, when you look at it overall, does it show you where we are lacking? Are you getting a sense from the questions you're asking and the answers you're getting where we are lacking as a country? We keep on hearing we need more of these digital skills, and everybody now wants their child to do coding, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not going to come from BrandMapp. Our work is to try and tap consumer sentiment. But obviously, we spend a lot of our time understanding where our work fits into the greater South African landscape. And I think there's, if you look at the studies themselves, there's been a lot of stuff coming out lately about unemployment rates of qualified young people, especially. I read a report the other day that said that 40% of graduates from last year are still unemployed. That alone tells you that there's definitely a skills gap here. So, the idea of of being a coder is fabulous. It's such a tiny little group compared to the requirements for something like, say, the health sector. I mean, we need teachers, we need educators, we need engineers, we need people who can keep the power running and keep the schools going, as much as we need people who are going to be coding on computers. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely room for somebody. I don't know whether it's the Department of Education or whether it's just us as a society, whether we need to encourage our children to do more what I'd call practical or necessary skills development rather than just doing things that they can or that sound good.
Now, as we conclude, Brendan, in terms of BrandMapp survey with education, if there was one key takeout that our viewers should have around South Africans, the middle class, particularly and up to education, what would that be that you want to leave on the minds of our viewers this afternoon?
Yeah, it's so simple. It's just that if we understand that it's one of those things that people will casually say around a dinner table, or maybe you heard your parents say it when you were young, and it's so important to be educated. But it really is. I mean, our study, if you look at the next sort of level down, the struggling masses of this country who we desperately want to help and uplift, it's not going to happen unless there is a highly educated group. And it might not ever be more than about 30% of the total population. But we desperately need those people to be educated and to try and help us grow this country. So the bottom line would be, whatever you do, don't underestimate how important education is. It is absolutely vital. Yeah.
After all, it's one of our heroes who said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. That's Nelson Mandela. On that note, Brendan, the Kock